Hello everybody, today we shall learn how to play Sicilian when the opponent refuses to play the main line, which is knight f3. First we shall just briefly cover a few rare lines which are d3. After d3 I recommend that we play knight c6. I will recommend knight c6 as long as there are no other threats to play. Also, a few other lines which I will just recommend briefly, only one move. Also f4, if opponent immediately goes with f4. I recommend that we stop further development of those pawns with e6. So in this variation, I recommend to play e6. And there is also another variant where I recommend e6, and that is I step back bishop c4. If an opponent plays bishop c4, I will also recommend e6, which actually stops sacrifice on f7 and also is a nice developing move. So these are just brief discussions about some rare openings, and we shall now see more frequent openings. Actually, we shall cover 3 sidelines, which are Smith-Mora Gambit, Alapin variation, and Closed Sicilian. So I step back. We shall first see the so-called Smith-Mora Gambit when an opponent immediately goes with d4. So after d4, we shall take it. And now the Smith-Mora Gambit means that an opponent will not retake, but it will most frequently play c3. However, let us see other options too. Actually, we will first cover when white retakes with the queen. When queen takes d4, we will simply play knight c6. Nice developing move and also chasing the queen, so knight c6 in this variation. Okay. Let us now see the variant c3, because we are not going to go deeper in that opening. You only need to know how to play these first few moves, and these are: you accept you accept taking the pawn, so we will really be a pawn up here, although white has a lead in the development, and white will most probably take with the knight. This is the purpose of this opening. And now I recommend that we simply go again with e6, that we somehow stop further development with this e6 move, which also prepares d5 at later stage, opens our bishop, and so on. So although we are behind in the development, we are a pawn up, and after this e6 move is actually not a bad position for us, so I recommend that you play this. And now a more interesting game occurs. I will now step back. If instead of taking the pawn and pushing c3, if your opponent plays actually now knight f3, now your pawn on d4 is attacked twice. and you will most probably lose that pawn. And so now interesting variations occur. Now, mm, okay, but we shall first try to save the pawn. We shall play e5. So after knight f3, we shall play e5. We shall play e5. It seems that an opponent can take e5 with the knight. Knight takes e5, but that is actually a huge blunder, because there is an option queen a5 check, which is actually double attack, and actually we are winning that knight on e5. So after e5, your pawn is actually safe. Your opponent cannot take on e5. Okay. What other options now white has? If now white plays developing move bishop d3, for example, we will simply push d6, and we are just fine. We are now really a pawn up. Some weird structure, but good pawn structure in the center. So we play like this. Okay. If white decides to take your d4 pawn, some players will play really this, but this simply wins the knight. E takes d4, so there is not much about this. So we step back. Another try for white in this position is bishop c4. A nice developing move targeting f7. Also, knight can jump to help to target f7, and now we need to react. But actually, there is no real threat to f7 so far. We shall see now what happens. Why we need to worry about knight g5 move. So we will play developing move knight c6. As already explained, knight c6 will be played when there are no other threats. Knight c6 is a developing move, further protects e5 pawn. And now let us see what options white has here. We will first comment already announced knight g5 move. So after knight g5 move, which is now a double attack on f7, but actually we have a defense, only one defense, but enough. Knight h6 is a defense, and it's a solid one. Your knight is on the edge of the board, but you have a solid development, so you don't need to worry about this. So knight h6 is a defense here. Other options for white here are bishop to g5, which also attacks our queen. And now, but bishop g5 actually allows queen b6 move. Actually allows queen b6 move, immediately targeting b2 pawn, and actually, although it is not clear, but actually you are now really a 4 pawn up. Black has 1 pawn more, and actually black has a solid development. Okay, if white decides immediately to sacrifice on f7, okay, but you don't need to worry about that. You simply take on f7. You are piece up. Okay, your king is a little bit exposed now, but you will have plenty of options to protect it, to put it to safety, and there is no real attack by white at the moment. So this is just okay for black. Okay, we step back. If white plays short castle now, we can play. I recommend that we now play bishop to c5. Maybe a little bit strange move, but on c5 you develop the piece. That piece can go to b6 if needed. You are protecting d4 pawn, so bishop c5 is okay move in this position. And finally we step back. If c3, now it's important to remember that we shall not take it. We already have a pawn up, and we don't need to be greedy. We don't want to give white too much advantage in the development, and we will simply play our developing move knight f6 now. After c3, we will play knight f6. Okay. We step back to move number 4. Other options another option for white is actually one another, which is a main line. So now, already on the move number 4, white can play c3. And actually c3 is the main line here. But again, we are not going to take it, but we are playing a developing move. This time I recommend knight c6. Knight c6 is a good move here. And now let us see what can happen. If c takes d4, we shall simply retake with the pawn. And our position is okay. So now we shall probably lose that pawn, but we are actually 6-6 in pawns, and it's okay position. So you don't need to fight for a pawn advantage here. So you need for a good development in this opening. Let us step back. If white now plays bishop c4, targeting f7 square, now we shall play developing move with another knight f6. Okay, so knight f6. And now white really has many possibilities. We shall briefly cover many frequently played ones. So if now bishop sacrifice on f7. This is also a mistake. You can be happy after king takes f7. Your position is just okay, and you are a piece up. We step back. If bishop g5, pinning your f6 knight, I recommend that you immediately challenge that bishop with h6. And now, the best for the white is to take. If bishop takes f6, we will retake with the queen. Queen takes f6, and it is okay position for us. We step back. If white refuses to capture on f6, most probably it will play bishop to h4. But now I recommend that we further chase that bishop, and actually we will have an advantage here. So g5. So we play g5, and let us see what happens now. If bishop g3, we are actually winning a pawn. So knight takes e4. So that is the purpose. So we are actually winning a pawn here. Other options for white are only to take on g5, either with the knight or the bishop, but in any case we simply retake with h pawn. Okay, we are giving 2 pawns for the piece, but actually we are in a huge development here. We are in a huge advantage here. So also bishop takes g5 is maybe a little bit better, but we have advantage in material. We have rook on open line. We have queen on open diagonal. We are simply have winning position here. Okay, we will step back. So if instead, if not playing bishop g5, but some other moves, let me see, queen b3. Queen b3 is, of course, queen f3 is, of course, a little bit sneaky move, targeting our f7, but actually we don't need to worry about f7 because of this. We simply play knight a5, attacking the queen. And if black captures on f7, we can simply play king e7, and actually white cannot protect both the bishop and the queen, so we are winning here. There is no way how both bishop on f7 is under attack, and the queen on b3 is under attack, and there is no way to save both. So we are winning here. Okay, we step back. So this was a tricky move, but it is good to remember this knight a5 move here with the idea. Okay, if queen e2 is played, I recommend again bishop c5. developing the bishop on c5, further protecting d4 pawn, as we have already seen earlier in one variation. Okay. If knight g5 now, again targeting f7 twice, but we actually have a defense. And defense is d5 move. d5 is protected both by the knight and the queen, and it's okay to stop the threat this way. So d5 is the solution after knight g5 here. We step back. If white decides to go short castle, now it's a good time to take the pawn. Now we can take d takes c3, and finally, if c takes d4, if white first take our pawn, then we can retake it, but a better way is to first play with the tempo, so develop our bishop with the check. Bishop b4 check is recommended first. Okay. Okay, and that is all about this Smith-Morra gambit. Very tricky opening, but you don't need to know much, and you can play safe this opening for black actually frequently with at least small advantage, and if white doesn't know all moves, you can be in a winning position already from the opening, as as we have seen this. Okay, we shall now step back to move number 3 and to cover the so-called Alapin variation of the Sicilian. So Smith-Morra gambit was a d4 immediately, and in Alapin variation, white prepares d4 by playing c3 first. So c3 first is probably more solid way to play by white. And let us see how we are going to play. First, I recommend that we simply go with knight f6, developing on the king side, because there is something already to be happen soon in the center. I recommend that we first develop on the king side, not knight c6, but knight f6 here. After knight f6, let us see possibilities for white. If queen c2, protecting that pawn, because our knight on f6 is also now targeting e4 pawn. We are attacking e4 pawn, so white needs to protect it. So queen c2 is one way to protect, but there is nothing much about that. We simply play another developing move, e5, with okay position. So we play e5. I step back. If white protects e4 pawn with f3 move, I again recommend e5. So this e5 was already a frequent idea in the open Sicilian, and now I will also recommend e5 when we can play it safely. Okay, I step back. If black plays bishop d3, very strange move, putting the bishop in front of the d pawn, protecting e4 this way. This is now really strange, and now I recommend that we develop another knight. As I already mentioned in the introduction, I will recommend knight c6 as long there are no other threats, so we develop also this another knight to this c6 square. Okay, stepping back, if d3, this is another variant for protecting that pawn, but again nothing special, and we again can play knight c6. And finally, if black neglects to protect the e4 pawn but plays d4 instead, sorry, I meant d4, it was a mouse slip. Now this is already a mistake because we now have a free pawn here, and actually that knight on e5 is also protecting our c5 uh, uh, pawn, and actually we are in okay position here. So there are some maybe it seems that white can try to chase our knight and then to take on c5, but let me see what happens after f3. After f3, we actually simply go back to f6, and actually we are in a good position. Actually white really can take the pawn, and we are 7-7 with pawns, but actually this is a weird pawn structure by white, and actually we can play e6, immediately targeting a c5 pawn, and we are simply in a better position here. Okay, I am going to step back to the main line here. So after c3, knight f6, okay, no, sorry. So yes, we are going to the move number 3 for white here. And actually the main line is really to chase our knight. So white plays e5, chasing our knight, but we are okay. After knight d5, we are okay. If further c4, we have squares for the knight, so it is not a problem. And let us see what white will now play. Some players will really play c4, chasing further this knight. And now it's good to remember that there is no need to retreat to b6, but b4 is a better place for b4 is a better place for the knight. Of course, Of course, white can play a3, immediately chasing our knight, but there is just a nice square for the knight here on c6. So knight 4 to c6. Another moves in this position after knight b4 for white are now playing d4, immediately challenging the center, and I recommend that we simply take it. C takes d4, and now there are many moves. There are actually, this is already an advantage for black here, and there is a great chance that your opponent will blunder. There is only one solid move for white here, and that is knight f3. So knight f3, attacking the d4 pawn, after which I recommend that we simply play d6, challenging e5 pawn and opening our bishop. So in this variation, I recommend d6. Let us see what other can white play and why this will be a disaster. So if instead of a knight f3, here white plays, for example, bishop to d2, attacking our knight. But again, we simply have knight 4 to c6, retreating to nice square and actually targeting e5 pawn, protecting our d4 pawn, and actually computer says that this is already a huge advantage, a huge positional advantage by black here. Okay, we will now step back. If instead queen takes d4, this seems a really natural move. White captures a pawn, but he forgets about the royal fork. So knight c2 wins the queen and the game. Okay, and another natural move is a3. But a3 is not a good move at all because of this queen a5 move. Of course, if white takes the knight on b4, it loses the rook. And other options are actually even worse because we have some discovered checks now. So if, for example, knight to d2, so knight to d2, we can take here on e5 with the check. And other options are not better. After bishop to d2, also queen takes e5 check is a strong move. So actually, we are winning here. Okay. We will now step back to move a number 4. Actually, move number 5. So d4 was not so good move for white here. After d4, only knight f3 works at a certain degree. But there are better options for white here. So these are, if knight c3 is played by white, I recommend that we simply go with d6, again challenging e5 pawn, opening our bishop, and d6 is a natural pawn structure here in the Sicilian. Okay, if instead white develops another knight, knight f3, I again recommend to play d6. And finally, if now, actually I probably already commented that move, if a3 chasing our knight, knight has a nice a square on c6. Okay, we shall now move back to move number 4 for white. So we are in a variation e5 for white, after which we play knight d5, and we have just covered a c4 move chasing our knight, and we will now see another variations. If bishop c4 attacking our knight, now knight has a good square on b6, because from there it attacks the bishop on c4, so knight b6 is now recommended. If instead simple developing move knight f3 at this point, I again recommend that we go with d6. And finally, if d4, now white has a really strong center here, and I recommend that we simply take the pawn. So c takes d4. And let us see now some variations for white. If now bishop c4 attacking our knight, we will now play an interesting move. We will not protect our knight. We will play queen to c7 move. We will play queen to c7, and actually it's pretty much obvious that white cannot take the knight because of the queen takes e5 check and a double attack, attacking the bishop and winning the bishop. So queen c7 is a sneaky move here, and good to remember. Okay. So let us okay. Let us see some other possibilities for for white here. Maybe white will not take. Maybe white will now notice that he cannot take on d5, and maybe it will play some other moves. Those are queen to b3, putting further pressure on d5. But now we again can simply take e5 with the check, winning a pawn with the tempo. Also, if bishop retreats to b3, we can also take the pawn with the tempo. If queen takes d4 pawn, protecting e5 this way, and putting further pressure on our d5 knight. Now we need to retreat with the knight, and we will retreat to b6 square, attacking the bishop. It is actually a double attack on the bishop, and the bishop will need to move now. And finally, some players will play queen to e2, and that is probably the best move. So queen e2 protects the bishop and also protects the e5 pawn. And after queen e2, I recommend that we simply again move the knight to b6, chasing the bishop. Okay. We will step back to move number 5. If instead of bishop c4 attacking our knight, black plays some other moves, like immediately taking the pawn on d4, queen takes d4. Now I recommend that we play e6. e6 stops the white's pawn, opens our f8 bishop, and also protects our knight on d5. This is a multi-purpose move, and I recommend to play e6 now. If white takes our pawn with the pawn, so c takes d4. Now I recommend that we challenge those pawns in the center simply by playing d6. Instead of e6, we now challenge those pawn chain in the center with d6. And finally, white can also play knight f3. White doesn't need to take our pawn immediately. Knight f3 is also a good move. And actually, I don't recommend that we capture on c3. I recommend that we go with another developing move, knight c6. Okay, and that was an Alapin variation. And finally, we will step back to move number 2. So we saw some rare variations, then we saw d4, the so-called Smith-Morra gambit, then we saw c3, the so-called Alapin variation, and now we will see knight c3, which is the closed Sicilian. Okay. How we are going to play against closed Sicilian? That is a really closed game, and I will show you only few moves how to fight in these variations. So first I again recommend that we go with d6 with our natural pawn structure c5 d6 in this Sicilian variation. And now if actually if white plays now knight f3, we will simply transpose to the open Sicilian. If knight plays f3, we like to play open Sicilian, and we will play knight f6, and we are actually in a transposition to open Sicilian. So let us see other options for white. If white doesn't play, so actually this d6 move provokes open Sicilian, but maybe some players will refuse it further. And so let us see other options for white instead of knight f3 here in this move. And there are really many variations. Let us see what happens in all of them, which are frequently played. After d4, actually we can simply take that pawn, and it is okay position for black. If bishop to b5 check, I will again recommend, as in one variation in the open Sicilian, to play knight d7. Knight d7 is a flexible move. If white takes, we develop the bishop, and we can chase the bishop further with the pawns. So knight d7 I recommend after this check here. We step back. If d3, if white goes with d3, actually we like that. White didn't achieve much, and we can simply go for our development. After d3, actually white didn't achieve anything in this opening, and I recommend that we play knight c6. As I already mentioned, when there are no real threats, we will play knight c6 first, and then developing on the king side. Also after g3, I also recommend knight c6. We will step back. After bishop to c4, we already saw this idea. I recommend e6, stopping any possibility to sacrifice on f7, although those sacrifices are frequently unsound, but for any case, this is also a good developing move, and I recommend this not just to stop the possible sacrifice on f7, but I recommend a good developing move here in this position. So e6. Okay, and finally, if white goes with f4 for the so-called Grand Prix attack. Okay, this is a really popular move for closed Sicilian players, and although I don't like g3, actually for black this means b3 and g6 moves, and fianchettoing the bishop in this variation, I will recommend exactly that. So in the Sicilian, I don't like to play g6 and going for dragon variations, but in this Grand Prix attack, we will play g6. So if f4, the so-called Grand Prix attack, we play g6 move. And now we will most probably play next move bishop to g7, but not necessarily immediately. Let us see if d3, we have time to play knight c6 first. d3 achieves nothing, and we have time to develop also on the queen side with knight c6, which we will do when allowed, as I already announced. Also, if bishop b5 bishop b5 check. I will now recommend not knight to d7, but now I will recommend bishop to d7. So white is already attacking on the king's side. We don't have time for a passive play here, so we immediately challenging that bishop on b5. So bishop d7 is now played. And finally, if some moves like bishop c4, we will now not go with e6. So after g6, we will rarely play e6. This is not a good pawn structure here. We are now not afraid on the sacrifice on f7, and we will simply play bishop to g7. And we are 2 moves from castling, so we are pretty safe here. And there are no other white pieces to join the attack on f7. Neither queen, neither knight, nothing. So bishop g7 simply. And if another developing move, which is natural for Grand Prix after f4, white plays knight f3, we will simply play again bishop g7. And we are in okay position. So we shall remember this. We do not play Dragon Sicilian, but on Grand Prix attack we play. So that is our strategy. And finally, let us move back to move number 3. If instead of immediate f4, black can try to play knight g to e2 first. So developing the knight, but not on f3, which will transpose to open Sicilian, but to this e2 square, leaving the option for f4 on some later move. So now I recommend that we simply go first with the developing move knight f6 on the king's side, knight f6. And now let us see. If some passive move like h3, we have time to play also developing move with another knight, knight c6. Stepping back, if knight g3 move, okay, this was a sneaky move. So knight first goes to e2, then on g3, preparing some pawn pushes, and so on and so on. So just to be safe, let's say white stop, h5. Okay, there is a fight in front of us, but we will not allow so simple to attacking on the king's side. So after this knight g3, I recommend h5, as I already recommended in some variations of open Sicilian. I don't like this h5, and I will rather play another variations, but when we are strongly provoked with possible attacks on the king's side, we will play h5. Moving back, if d3, pretty passive move, so we again have time to develop knight c6. Of course, if d4, we will take on d4, and actually we are again in transposition to open Sicilian. So if white now recaptures, we simply a6 and we are in a Najdorf variation of the open Sicilian. And finally, we step back. If black decides to go with g3, okay, it's some idea with some pawn pushes on the king side and fianchettoing the bishop, but this is now not so dangerous. And actually now we have time again to play first knight c6, developing another knight and to see what will happen next. And that's all, folks. So I hope that we will it's not my intention that we learn all the openings. This is actually impossible, but trust me, I have chosen frequently played lines, both by professional master players and also by amateur players. And also I checked carefully my recommendations, not just by this short engine analysis that you can see during the video, but with a long analysis, also by checking many opening books, both from master players and also from correspondence chess, and I really prepared those videos that we can play just on top level our openings. So I hope that you will enjoy, that you will be confident, and don't try to remember everything. Try to remember main ideas and try to fight for your middle game after that. Thank you. See you soon. We shall soon cover d4 opening for white. This is very important for us to learn because we will not play d4 by ourselves. So as white players, we will always play e4, and so we need to know how to play against d4. So from all videos, the next two are most important because you will learn how to face d4 white players. You really need to know that very, very well. So see you soon in the next video when we shall start with d4 openings.